It's time for the State of Pro Wrestling, scheduled for one fall with a 60-minute time limit. And now, from parts unknown, your tag team champions of the world, John Orlando from the PVD Cast and Gerald Glassford from the Pop Culture Cosmos. Ding, 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 and we're back. It is match time for the State of Pro Wrestling, a special episode. It is Gerald Glassford from the Pop Culture Cosmos, Lakers Fast Break, and Inside Sports Fantasy Football. Welcome to the State of Pro Wrestling special episode. It is truly great to have you here. While you're here, please like and subscribe. Subscribe today to get the latest notifications on when we go live on the air on this channel with the Pop Culture Cosmos, PC Multiverse, Inside Sports Fantasy Football, and of course, the State of Pro Wrestling. But my tag team partner is also here. It's a three-way dance, so to speak, as they used to say in ECW. A good man indeed. He is, of course, the man behind Matt Talk, which is not about pro wrestling. I always have to say that with a caveat. It is, of course, the man behind also as well, the PVD Cast. It is the PVD MVP himself, John Orlando. What's up, my friend?
Oh, not much, Gerald. Not much at all. You know, just it's been a busy couple of days, especially with our topic that we're going to discuss this evening. And, of course, I don't want to overstep my bounds and step on your toes, but we have, of course, a great guest joining us as well.
No, that's okay. I tagged you in. You can step on my toes. Just, I will give you the hard look like there's some dissension brewing between us. You know, that old deal. But go ahead, please introduce our guest. He is your guest, but now also my guest as well. But please go ahead and introduce.
Well, a man that I've known for a number of years who has been a fantastic ring announcer in the indie scene here in Ohio, and actually all over the place, because he's gone out to Jersey, he's gone to PA, he's been hitting a lot of the East Coast and Midwestern states. It's my man, Will. Will, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. And I'm glad that I didn't get a full intro, because there's no way it could have compared to the introduction that you got. So I'm glad we kept it simple for me. Jeez, that was quite the entrance.
Well, at least he did say like the Jobbers when they came out, and John Orlando, and then we have Will. There you go.
Fair enough.
Gee, I wonder who's going to win this match. There you go. But great to have you here. I am truly happy. I wish we could have gotten my other guest. I'll mention it to you after the show if I remember just who I was, because you might be familiar with him, because he was also someone on the indie scene as well. But he says he's going to catch the show on the rerun when it comes up on YouTube for him. So I did want to say welcome, and this special edition is because the Wrestling Observer, one of the most storied wrestling news, paraphernalia that you can get now for decades. I've been a reader off and on, to let everybody know, over the course of decades, since I guess I saw and heard about it based off of Dave Meltzer, who writes and created the Wrestling Observer newsletter since he was starting up an article each week on the National, which was a national weekly. Actually, no, it was a daily. It was a daily sports U.S. paper at that point in time. So he had a weekly column on it, and I got turned on to it for a little while. And I was a subscriber at different points of time in my life, and it's been great to see what that has evolved into, because he has brought out, no matter what people say about his opinions, especially as of late, which have not been all that great, but the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame is still, to this day, one of these most revered and most talked about Hall of Fames for the pro wrestling industry. I know a lot of people have issues and take issues with the WWE's Hall of Fame and who they bring in, who they leave out. I know that there's a Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame based in Iowa that a lot of people revere. Cauliflower Alley's nominees as well for their revered status to get in there in Las Vegas, what they do here every year. But for the fans and also the people behind the industry that vote, they do vote on this. but I wanted to go ahead and get these guys in. What if we voted on the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame class for 2024? So, without further ado, I do want to go ahead and state right off the bat, it was announced the inductees for this year were Roman Reigns, Shingo Takagi, Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful, Johnny Rougeau, the Young Bucks, Los Hermanos Dinamita, Sema, Johnny Saint, and Bobby Davis. Those were the honorees in their respective, actually, those are the inductees in each respective category. Guys, before we get into our voting in the various categories, any thoughts first off? John, I'll start with you on the inductees to the Pro Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame class of 2024.
I think that there is a small problem for me, and I know I'm probably the only one that feels this way, but I know that there's a particular date they have to be wrestling for at least 10 years. But when I look
They
at
also
Roman,
have to be above a certain age. They have to be above, I think, 35.
Yeah. But I don't, the Young Bucks, Roman Reigns, they're still doing their own thing. And I just can't, it bothers me. Like, I just can't push that to the side and go, okay. Like, to me, it just seems like when you talk about a Hall of Fame, that these should be people that are no longer as active. Not saying that they have to completely be done with pro wrestling, but be a little less active. I guess maybe because I look at it and model it after like the Pro Football Hall of Fame or the Hockey Hall of Fame or the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Like, those are past greats. And when I see Roman Reigns on this list and now he's an inductee, I don't know. I don't know. It kind of makes me feel I don't know. It makes me feel doubtful about those selections. So I think that's my biggest concern. I must confess there's some that I'm not familiar with. Bobby Davis. I don't know exactly who Bobby Davis was or is. So, I mean, okay, I can't say anything against that selection because I don't know no better, So the ones I do think, though, I do think Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff definitely deserves to be in it. He had a very storied career and actually not only in the ring, but also outside of the ring, training, down at the WCW power plant. So I have no problems with them. Johnny Rougeau, is he the dad to the Rougeau brothers?
Yes.
Okay. Again, never seen any of his stuff. Just figured that he was one of the Rougeau's dads, or was the Rougeau's dads. Yeah, I mean, that's all I could say. I really, it's all I got when it comes to who was put in.
Let me ask you, Will, you heard the inductees for this year's Hall of Fame. I know that a lot of people were very divisive, which we will go into later on in our own choices on Roman Reigns, because, yes, while he had one of the longest, most tenured championship runs with his most recent run for the WWE as champion in a time where it was getting much better, much more popular, to the boom time it is now, according to most metrics out there, he also was the most heavily pushed individual during a time when the whole industry was in a more of a down part as far as the latter part of this decade. Your thoughts on the inductees? Again, the Young Bucks are also very divisive as well. Trust me, if you listen to John and I, you'll understand it is a very hot button issue with those guys. Your thoughts, though, on the inductees for this year's Hall of Fame class?
I think I have the same problem that John has. Is it's very difficult for me to kind of separate the current era people, the people who are still doing, especially at a high level, as being Hall of Famers. I think it's the selections kind of remind me of like Mike Trout, for example, where it's like, okay, we know Roman Reigns is going to be in all the Hall of Fames possible when he's done, just like Mike Trout, but he's still doing things currently at a very high level. So it seems weird to anoint him already, because I think there's still more that can be done. Obviously, if he retired tomorrow, never wrestled again. He's in every Hall of Fame known to man. There's no question about it, I think. But it's weird because when I see the list of winners, I think to myself, who the heck was the competition? And but we know the competition, and I think that makes it even worse because now I'm looking at some of these other names and I'm thinking, okay, if these are the picks and these are the people that won, well, what about X, Y, and Z from this list, and how are they not, how are they not there instead? Why isn't, I know we'll get into this later, but, I look at this list immediately and, Matt and Jeff Hardy in here and, you know, they were the Young Bucks before the Young Bucks. And it's like, well, why wouldn't you put them first and then Young Bucks later when it's time? That's just kind of like what jumps out to me initially is, I feel like there's some other names that probably are a little more deserving. And then these people could come up, when their time's due.
I think also what has come into question, guys, is the allegiance, the alliance with AEW. I know that's become a great hot button topic when concerning Dave Meltzer and/or the Wrestling Observer itself. That experience because of their coverage of AEW. Some have perceived it in a certain way. So I think that also gets reflected by their fan base and also reflected by their voting as well, Sean. What do you think?
Oh, I agree. I think that there is obviously a connection, I don't want to say favoritism, but there is certainly something
There's
there
a
between,
bias. I
yeah,
think
but
there's a bias.
yeah, between Dave and the AEW, and I don't know. I think it does. The optics look bad. That I'll use a term like that. I think the optics look bad for that going on. I don't know. I mean, I think it gets blown out of proportion about how much stroke Dave does have with AEW, but I think that probably definitely in many people's eyes when they look at the winners and they look at the list of who the candidates are, that's certainly something that's in the back of many people's minds. I'm sure of it.
So with that, for the rest of the time, we're going to go over our thoughts on who we think should have been inducted into the Wrestling Observer's Hall of Fame. So we'll start by the categories listed on that link I sent you guys. We'll start with the historical performers era candidates first. I can't believe it was almost like a tongue twister there, but we'll start off with those candidates from the historical performers era. Ole Anderson, Afa and Sika Anoya, Bob Armstrong, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, British Bulldogs, June Byers, Wild Bull Curry, Junkyard Dog, Cowboy Bob Ellis, Pampiro Firpo, Black Gordman and Great Goliath, Archie the Mongolian Stomper Goldie, the Hart Foundation, Sputnik Moreau, Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch, Johnny Rougeau, Iron Sheik, Rick Steamboat and Jay Youngblood, Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon, and the Von Erichs, Kevin, Kerry, and David. The first thing I'm going to say, guys, I think they should have bracketed down this into two different, as far as classic wrestlers eras, before 1980 and after 1980, because I think it's really hard for any classic wrestlers now that are before 1980 to actually get consideration. Although Johnny Rougeau did get in, so he was hyped up, must have been really propped up and then promoted by the Wrestling Observer newsletter in order for them to get the kind of word out on that. But John, I'll start with you, my friend. Your thoughts on how we're going to do this and how many you're going to pick from the historical performer era?
We want to pick. There's a lot, so do we want to pick 3?
You want to pick 3? Absolutely.
Okay. Well, for this one, I felt like this performer, definitely needed to go in because of maybe some of his contributions to the civil rights movement. I'm picking Sputnik Monroe because in an era when there was segregation in Memphis and African American people were not treated well, the stories of Sputnik Monroe going into the African American neighborhoods and inviting African American folks to come out to the show, standing up for himself and telling promoters, if you don't, treat African Americans equally, they can sit wherever. I'm not wrestling, or, that type of thing to me, even though, he didn't maybe have the impact of a Martin Luther King Jr. or Malcolm X or whatnot. Still, that was something that I think goes above and beyond just his skills in the ring, and his ability to get heat. I think that he first started doing it as a way to get heat, but I think that, as time went on and you saw him do more and more things to try to bring to light this injustice, this bias, this prejudice against African Americans, I think that's something that should be commended. And like I said, maybe he didn't have as huge of an impact as some of these other great leaders, but he did a part. He used his fame for the right reasons instead of the wrong reasons. So I think definitely he should be in just for that. Not only what he did in the ring, but also for his activism.
Okay, number 2.
Number 2, I went with Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood because I thought that they were probably one of those teams that kind of put high-flying action on the map. I think without them, that they're probably maybe wouldn't be a Hardy's Boys. I'm not, I hate to, I'll just say, that's how much impactful they are, that, that they may have changed some of the modern tag teams that we see today. And I'm a Steamboat mark. I make no bones about it. Ricky Steamboat could do no wrong in my eyes. So, and then thirdly, this one I just kind of selected because I'm surprised he's not already in. And he was an owner, a booker, a talent. I picked Ole Anderson.
Okay.
And I know Ole's crotchety and he's problematic at times, but I still think that he's someone that's deserving to go in.
Will, what are your thoughts on the historical performers era candidates that you would like to put if you were voting?
Yes, I think my perspective is going to be a little bit different just because, like you were mentioning, some of the pre-'80s performers are starting to lose a little bit of their luster, or at least their familiarity with current wrestling fans. And although John and I are somewhere close in age, I've always been a little bit younger minded, and I know he knows a lot more about ancient wrestling than I do. But for me, it really started in the late '80s, early '90s. That's kind of where I get most of my stuff from, and I kind of think about this list as their impact on current wrestling and how some of that affects things. So I think number 1 for me right out of the gate, that jumps right off the page, is the Hart Foundation. I think Bret Hart and a lot of the stuff he did even after the Hart Foundation, after the tag team stuff, obviously carries well into today. But those early Hart Foundation years with him and Jim were just instrumental for tag team wrestling in general, especially in that early WWF period. They were involved all the time, in just about everything. So that one really jumped off the page for me. The other one, and this is only because I'm surprised they're not already there. When I see Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, it's just kind of like, what, like, why are they still here? You ever see those lists of NFL Hall of Famers or baseball Hall of Famers that are still eligible, and you're like, why is this guy still on the list? He's done all these things and he just hasn't got in. That's kind of how I look at Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson, and Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch. To be honest, that was kind of the 1A or the 2A, 2B, where I was kind of like, these guys should already be in. This is like no brainer type stuff, right? So those were kind of my 2A, 2B, kind of cheating there. And then for the third one, I mean, I thought it would be a pretty good nod to give it to Iron Sheik, right? Given the circumstances over the past year, with his passing and things like that, I think that would make sense. Even though his Twitter and Instagram accounts still live on. I think that would be a pretty good nod to put him in there, and the significance that he had in that time period. And I think it was interesting that you mentioned in the beginning. I was going to come off mute and say that about Meltzer and AEW. However, if you watch the Vince documentary on Netflix, he had his hands all over that as well, where they're showing him in the room.
That's where actually he came off very well.
Yeah,
Probably
for
the
sure.
best he's come off in quite some time was in that documentary. It's just that of late he is not the individual I remember following as a younger man. He's said some things, made some misreporting, and it's very hard to defend some of the things he said and done in recent times, which is
Sure.
disappointing to me. It breaks my heart, actually, is what it
Yeah, I
does,
agree
because
with that.
that's a great part of my youth and my younger self that I was tying on. But Will, absolutely, those are your 3 picks right there: Hearts, Blanchard, Anderson, and Iron Sheik.
Yeah.
All right, there you go. 3 excellent picks, and for you as well, John. Mine, I will the thing is, I do not know how all those great teams like the British Bulldogs, Blanchard and Anderson, Hart Foundation, the Texas Outlaws, Steamboat Youngblood, all those teams have been not gone on this or not been inducted at this point in time. I don't know why or how they have been continually ignored to this point. Even if you want to go to the Von Erichs as well, and what they did for their region. You talk about also what Junkyard Dog did for Mid-South as well. So it's tough. I think that's really tough that it was still something I look at. I think I looked at quite a bit over the course of the past 24 hours, but I'm going to go at this point in time, Hart Foundation. I'm going to go Blanchard and Anderson because of the success in both the major federations of their time. And I'm going to go the Von Erichs just because the fact that they were the Von Erichs, not anything relating to the recent movie. It's relating to what I remember them being as far as in the early to mid 80s, as far as before, obviously, David's passing, a tragic passing, and then also Kerry's as well, what they were in those early 80s with the Freebirds. So those are my picks right there. So all right. It is, of course, the State of Pro Wrestling. It is Gerald Glassford, John Orlando, and also Will right here for you. I want to go ahead. Thank you so much for watching us. We truly appreciate you doing so. So now we get to the modern performers. I'll start with you, Will. And again, for something that sticks out to me, well, I'll moan and groan about it when I choose one. But there's some things in here I don't understand some of the people in the right or wrong category. I'll have to go ahead and talk about that later. But what do you see when you're looking at the modern performers for the U.S. and Canada?
Yeah, this one was a little bit harder, I thought, to come up with, and I think there's a fine line here on some of these names as to kind of where they should go. I kind of see some of these people as more historic figures as opposed to modern performers.
Yeah, some of those started like in the late 80s, the 90s they excelled, and yet they're in the modern as opposed to historical.
Yeah, like Hall and Nash, for example. I mean, I wouldn't call them modern performers by any stretch, but yeah, this one was tough for me. I thought that that Matt and Jeff Hardy should have been number one. I think it was we were kind of talking about in the beginning. Um, if there's no Matt and Jeff Hardy, is there a Young Bucks? Probably not. Maybe not the same. They kind of set that tone. So I kind of think if you're going to put the Young Bucks in, Matt and Jeff Hardy should either already been in or in over them. So that's kind of where I am with that one. Probably somewhat unpopular opinion, but I would probably lean CM Punk, just based off of his significance to both AEW and WWE. He has become a little bit more polarizing, in the last couple years for out of the ring stuff. But he has some real significance when you talk about the promos and some of the feuds and things like that during a period of time where I wasn't really into WWE at the time that he was on that ascent. A lot of people I know weren't really into it at the time, but he's kind of one of those names that kind of came through there. And then this one I think is probably a little bit overlooked. But I think if you look at the entire career and body of work of Randy Orton, I think that's probably one of the names on this list that kind of jumps out and says, well, you may not be the Randy Orton you're seeing right now if you watch, Monday Night Raw
Yeah, well,
anytime recently.
And our thoughts with Randy Orton because of the vicious pile driver that was given to him by Kevin Owens and taken away at the hospital. It was so tragic, Will.
Yeah. But if you go back to the legend killer Randy Orton and some of the stuff that he did there, I mean, it's in comparison to the rest of the list, I think those are probably my three picks.
So you had CM Punk, Randy Orton, and
Matt and Jeff Hardy.
Matt and Jeff Hardy. Okay, I thought because you talked about Hall and Nash first. That was my.
Yeah, I was doing some compare. Yeah, I definitely got a little tricky there.
No worries. You can't go wrong with these picks. So I'll just leave it at that. John?
I'll disagree. I think you.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I guess so. The way we started off the show, yes. Like I stand duly corrected. Yes. John?
Okay. For me in the modern era, I think I'm kind of what Will said is I am kind of looking at those that are probably mislabeled, if you will. So my three, I went with the Steiners because again, I can't believe they're not in. And when you talk about one of the epic tag teams of the 90s, I think that they are clearly, on top with that. My second one, because we talked about him on this very show, Gerald, when he passed, I think Sid Vicious deserves a look in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he had a great look. He had that intensity. Dare I say, he was the one that kind of put the power bomb on the map. I mean, I know people had done it beforehand, but he was the one that consistently used it as a finisher. So I think that he certainly is deserving. And then this one, kind of mixed feelings, so to speak, with this person, but I picked Trish Stratus as my third. I say that because, when she started out, she was a manager, and then she was not really that good in the ring, but she really worked her tail off to get up to being a very, very good wrestler and being at the top of the card. So I think that she is deserving to be in the Hall of Fame.
I think they're all great picks. Trish, the way that she, at least at the time, brought women to the forefront at the Attitude Era / early 2000s feuds with Mickie James and Lita and whatnot. They were a great part of WWE wrestling at that time. So yeah, absolutely. And Sid Vicious, I'm a Sid Vicious mark. We just talked about him when he passed, and so yeah, I can't say I blame you a bit. He was just barely off my list. He's close. He was very close to it, but the only reason I couldn't put him on my list is because of what I'm going to argue about right now. And that's the first thing I see is when you look at the modern performers in U.S. Canada candidates, you mentioned Trish Stratus. Why aren't the women in their own category? Is the first thing I'd ask you. The second thing is one of my candidates that I'm going to promote. Why is this person in as far as U.S. Canada when this person originates from Osaka, Japan? And that just blows my mind because my first candidate is Asuka Kana. Asuka, she has done sensational things. She's won every title. Well, they actually just created a U.S. Women's Championship, so she hasn't won every title, but she's won everything imaginable up until this point in the WWE. She held the NXT title for 3 years. She has the longest undefeated streak in modern history, even more than Goldberg and more than Roman Reigns. So, with that said, also the fact that she is the most prolific wrestler of Japanese origin, either male or female, outside of Japan. No Japanese wrestler has ever won more outside of Japan than her, and it's not even close. And that's just for done this, they're also, when you put her in that category, you're also forgetting all the years that she dominated Japanese pro wrestling. You're just saying that, oh, she didn't do anything before she got to the WWE. When you put her in that category, you don't put her where she rightly belongs in the Japanese or a women's wrestling. Because now I have to leave off Trish Stratus and Becky Lynch, who both are deserving to be on this list as well. So you gave me the hard choice, and John, I've been a very big proponent of Asuka/Kana and her work over the years, and definitely going to put her in, would be my first choice. Again, this was the hardest one. I agree with Will. They're all hard, but this particular category was hard because it's just so vague across the 90s, across the 2000s. I'm going to go with Kevin Nash and Scott Hall for what they did to spark one of the greatest, or help spark one of the greatest periods of pro wrestling history with the NWO and the Outsiders, and what they did for that. And then, what they came back with the WWE as well in the later, obviously what they did for them. And then, of course, you could also throw in what they did as singles wrestlers, but mainly what they did as far as the NWO. And then last but not least, I would put in the Steiner brothers as well. I think it's illogical to figure out how the greatest team of the 1990s, because if you make the Road Warriors, which I wrote an article on at one time, I said the Road Warriors were the greatest team ever based off their work in the 80s. And if you think that the best team of the world for the 90s was the Steiners, how do you leave them off for so long? So it befuddles me there too. So I'm going to go with the Steiners, Hall and Nash, and Asuka. But again, I think the category needs to be broken up even more and specialized even more for women, and to put people in the right place of their birth, their country of origin as well. So I don't know how you guys feel about that. Am I wrong in saying that, Will and John?
No, I think you're right. I think the women would be a better category. I think that they should do that, because I think you're cutting short some of those women that definitely deserve to be in there. Okay, because and if it gets to, oh, we have to fit these gentlemen on this list, then that's putting the screws to some very talented female competitors that definitely deserve to be in there. So I think that absolutely, and I agree that I think you could split up that category into, as you said, post 1980s and before 1980s, and that also would help smooth out some of those issues.
Well, I mean, the great picks by us so far. I mean, do you have anything that you'd like to add on that before we continue?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to, I guess you would have to know who's already in order
Yes.
to kind of wonder why some other names aren't on this list that kind of give you that name association. Like as soon as you mentioned Trish, you started mentioning Lita and Sable and all those kind of women that were in that same era. But I just don't know how many of them are already in. Maybe that's why they're not here. But yeah, I think it would be important for them to have their own category. And when you mentioned Asuka, I went and looked at the Japanese candidates, because my initial thought was, well, did they put any women in the Japanese candidates category? Because it kind of didn't look like it at first. Did a little research. They did, in fact, put a couple in there. So it didn't really make sense why they chose to kind of separate her out and put her into that. But I'm guessing it just has to be based on the significant contribution to what she's done recently. Probably some recency bias in there, but yeah, it seemed to seem to be like an odd one out there. I kind of agree.
Well,
Where
here's
do we
my
get to go? I was going to say, where do you see what I'm going to say about the Japan candidates?
well, and I think you and I are going to be on the same wavelength, Gerald. I was just going to chime in and say, how come the Japanese candidates and the Mexico candidates are such a small list? Like, I know we've been doing 3, but it was really hard for me to come up with a third person because the list is so short, and you can't tell me that there's not deserving competitors out of those 2 countries that should be on this list.
Again, I don't know. I know Dave was a big part in creating this list. I thank him for taking the time to do so. But yeah, some of the things that were made as far as these categories just leave a lot to be desired. Japan candidates, I'm going to list them off right now. Sima, Satoshi Kojima, and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Yoshiaki Fujiwara, Hayabusa, Antonio Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi, Kento Miyahara, Zack Sabre Jr., I'll just say that, Meiko Sadamura, Tiger Jeet Singh, Shingo Takagi, Yoshihiro Takayama, Manami Toyota, and Toshio Yamada. Funny, I thought Zack Sabre was from the UK, I believe it was. Just saying. All right. But on that note, who do you have? John, I'll start off with you first for the Japanese candidates.
Okay. My number 1, and I again can't believe he's not in there, is Hayabusa. I mean, so innovative in his day, and then the injury, the recovery from the injury, then his passing. I mean, it's like a movie script, kind of. You know, his whole life is like that. And again, I'm surprised that he's not in there. I mean, how can you not, put him in there when he was the cornerstone of FMW for a long, long time? So that was my first candidate. My second one, I have to be 100% honest. Manami Toyota, I'm very familiar with her work, and I assume she's already in. But I did not know much about Yamada. So I actually had to, while researching, I had to sit down and fire up YouTube and watch a little bit of Yamada's work. And I could see why they were a pretty good tag team. So I'm going to put them as my second candidates. And then I really don't have a third one. I got to be honest, guys. I looked at that list and I'm like, there's got to be some other choices because I don't have any others. I just really don't. Tiger Jeet Singh is interesting. Takagi, Sima, they all just kind of don't seem really good candidates. I'm sorry to say. So those are my only 2 I have, Gerald. I'm gonna deviate from the pick of 3. Sorry.
Now I know Tiger Jeet Singh from Canada, but I think because I don't know, it depends on how you value or see his Canadian presence, but he dominated in Japan and Japan only in my eyes. He wrestled all over the world, but for him it was more that with Zack Sabre Jr., I think he still is young enough where he should be counted through all parts, especially Europe, since he originates from Europe. But that's just me. I maybe nitpicking, but it is what it is. But
you know what? Then we'll put down Tiger Jeet Singh for me because I forgot he was in those crazy fire matches with Sabu back in the early 90s, I believe. So There you go. I'll throw him in there. But see what I mean? We had to literally kind of coax me into agreeing to that. That's how bad this list is.
So what do you have, Will, for Japanese candidates?
All right. If you're listening to this show, don't come for my neck. But I've been to Japan twice. I went to Wrestle Kingdom last year. Saw several other wrestling matches when I went back in March of 2024. My Japanese wrestling knowledge prior to, I would say, the good year of 2017 barely exists. I don't know much about Japanese wrestling prior to any of that time period. I never really sought it out prior to, to its most recent popularity. I think when New Japan really started getting popular in the States in that 2017, 2018 Kenny Omega time period type stuff, that's kind of when I really started paying attention to it, and going back through looking at some of the older stuff, but not getting too deep into it. So for me on this list, it's probably all about recency bias. If I'm looking at some things, with the exception of Antonio Inoki, that's probably the one that jumps off the page to me right off the bat, just because of some of the historical significance there that I do know about. And then that leads me to just take in Shingo, and then Kojima and Tenzan as the tag team up there at the top, and that's just literally nothing but recency bias. I think it's a little funny that SEMA was the actual pick. I saw him wrestle in Dayton, Ohio a couple years ago against Trey Lamar, who was a good friend of John and I's. And that's kind of funny just to see his name make it in there. I don't know much about his entire body of work, but for Zack Sabre Jr. being in there, I think it's very much the same as where you could put Will Ospreay in there, because despite the fact that they both are from the United Kingdom, I couldn't tell you a significant match or announcement that I've seen for either of them out of the UK in 5 to 7 years. I mean, I feel like it's everything you see from them is New Japan. All the titles and accolades and all that stuff seems like it's always centered around New Japan and Japanese wrestling. It's, if you didn't know who they were, you would kind of think, oh, these got to be, Japanese guys, because they're so associated with this company and these activities and stuff. So it is kind of funny to see them on there. But yeah, that's gonna have to be my picks, just strictly based on some recency bias and lack of knowledge. This was kind of a tough category for me, for sure.
So wanted to list them out again?
Yeah, for sure. It was Inoki and Sakaguchi.
Okay.
And then Kojima and Tenzan, and Shingo.
Okay. All right. So those two you got there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And Shingo. Okay. I got it.
Yes. Oh yeah, the two tag
okay.
teams in the single. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely. Nope. All good. Good picks. And for me, I think I'm going to go what I was evaluating on. I don't want to give Zack Sabre Jr. I think he's got still a career to go. I was close to giving it to him. Like you said, he's done so much in Japan, but I think he still has a mark to make elsewhere. So I'm kind of reluctant to go ahead and get him in there just yet, because when you're thinking of him over 35, I don't think of him as that, but he is. Hayabusa, I was probably very, like John, very much on, because of the fact he initiated such a high flying style. I also want to go ahead and say Meiko Sanomura, who will be retiring next year, is someone I wanted to go ahead and salute for her long career in the business, and the fact she had many great matches over the years, late 90s, early 2000s, as far as last decade, with Kana, aka Asuka, who is actually in the other categories. So again, I'm still trying to figure that one out. Meiko Satomura. So for her, those two, and then last but not least, I would probably go with what John was saying on Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada as far as that's picked. But yes, the Japanese candidates were hard to pick because they don't stand out as much as so many of the candidates in the other ones, the other categories right now. But next we got the Mexico candidates: Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner, Sangre Chicana, Psycho Clown, El Dandy, Los Hermanos Dinamita, Dorel Dixon, Grand Hamada, El Hijo del Santo and Octagon, La Parca AAA, Huracan Ramirez, Mascarita Sagrada, and Voladar Jr. Will, who do you have first off, my friend?
Oh man, if you think my Japanese category was bad, my Mexico candidates are probably even worse. Oh man, yeah, I might not have been the right guy for this episode, but
You're doing great, my friend.
for me, once again, I think it's a lot of recency bias, a lot of just stuff that I've seen. I'm not super familiar with a lot of Mexico wrestling. I do watch AAA as often as possible, just because I think it's absolute crazy, some of the stuff that they pull off and go through. And I did watch some. There's some Mexican hardcore stuff out of like Zona 23 and some of that stuff that I've watched before as well. So for me, jumping off the list is Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner. Familiar with them. That's probably one of my picks there. I think Psycho Clown's the other one that I would go with, and La Parca from AAA as well. I know there's like various versions and crazy history behind the La Parca character, so I'm not going to pretend to be super familiar with all that. But if that's kind of just a who do I know type of answer, unfortunately. But those are the kind of the ones that I'm familiar with. But I can't wait to hear how some of your guys' picks went, because I'm sure you're a lot more familiar than I.
So you had Blanco, Wagner, La Parca, AAA, and which one?
Psycho Clown.
Psycho Clown. Okay. Our own Psycho Clown, John Orlando. What do you have as far as?
Well, this one was a little bit easier for me than the Japanese one. I'm a huge mark for La Parca. And yes, Will, I agree with you. There are so many twists and turns on that character. I just liked La Parca when he was in WCW. I mean, doing all the character, the costume, the funky dance, the whole 9 yards. In fact, I just lamented to somebody, another friend on Facebook, who had posted a video clip of La Parca, and I'm like, I have one of his action figures from Mexico, and he's like, I'm jealous. So La Parca for me, the tag team of El Hilo del Santo and Octagon, because their feud with Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr, that fantastic stuff, awesome stuff. So and third, I'm going El Dandy, because hey, Bret Hart said he should get a title shot, so who am I to argue with the excellence of execution, right?
Oh, there you go. So you got La Parca, El Dandy, and who else?
El Hiro del Santo and Octagon.
There you go. El Hijo del Santo and Octagon. Yep. That's where I'd start as far as El Hijo del Santo and Octagon. For me, they faced off against Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero. Am I mistaken on that? At When Worlds Collide, John?
Yep.
That is one of the greatest Lucha Libre matches in history because of what happened, how much heat it generated, how great a team Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero were, and the fact I have an octagon mask should not come into play into that at all, as you see right beside me on my right, which I wear when John and I mask up to be the Masked Marauders. But I'm going to say El Hijo del Santo and Octagon simply because of their fame and their popularity to late 90s, early 2000 popularity of Lucha Libre. I'll probably go with that. So, because it was a boom time for them, as far as also not only in Mexico, but crossing over into California and the West Coast for Lucha Libre as well. La Parca, I guess the most famous version of La Parca, I'll go in, not all the other substitutions or standbys or La Parca, whatever, La Parca. The La Parca that actually created some exciting and memorable, great memories in not only AAA, but also as well in WCW, Rey Mysterio Jr., Hoovy, as far as just a great number of cruiserweights that were just a part of that scene, and La Parca and Rey Mysterio had some great clashes there. So Juventud Guerrera, yeah, I'm surprised he's not on this list already himself. Last but not least, I'm probably going to go with the Los Hermanos Dinamita, just because they were such a well-known trios, and I think just because of the fact that the trios teams are so revered in lucha libre, I'm going to go with them as well. So make that short and sweet. Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, Africa. There's Spiros Arion, Dominic Danucci, George Gordienko, Billy Joyce, Killer Carl Cox, the Royal Brothers, Johnny Saint, Adrian Street, Jose Torres, and Otto Vons. John, this has to be the toughest category. I could not find 3 candidates myself, but who do you have?
Ooh, well, I picked Dominic Danucci right off the bat because of 2 reasons. One, probably because of the people that he trained, Shane Douglas, Mick
I knew you were
Foley.
going to say that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. But I'm also, the second reason was as a kid that grew up on that Pennsylvania Ohio border, being real close to Pittsburgh. Dominic Danucci was a big deal in Pittsburgh. So I kind of knew of him before, he became the thing, he became a big thing with Mick Foley and that. So Dominic Danucci for me. I picked Johnny Saint because I can't believe Johnny Saint, again, is one of those people that aren't already in this Hall of Fame, but just his British style is, I could watch that all day and just be mesmerized by it. And then a guy that I thought was really, really good, even back in his heyday, the exotic one, Adrian Street. You talk about, bending, the character to, is he, he's with Miss Linda, but is he not with Miss Linda? Is he gay? Is he not gay? I thought that was a great, awesome character from back in the day.
Who do you have, Will? Again, seeing this category and then seeing other individuals and where they were placed, again, it boggles my mind how they came up to this conclusion on these categories and people who qualified. Because Dominic Danucci, Adrian Street, I don't remember them dominating in Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Islands and Europe. I think they dominated, made the most of their marks here in the U.S. But again, I digress on that. Who do you have for this category, if I may ask?
Yeah, so I think as we progress, the categories get harder and harder for me to relate to. I do find it very difficult, with the history and a lot of the things people talk about, European wrestling, some of the feds that are in Germany, a lot of the stuff that goes on in the UK, in England, that these are the only names that they could come up with. If you take that entire list, there might be 1 or 2 that have a color photo. I think all these you're going to find a lot of black and white photos here, a lot of grainy film. You're going to be hard pressed to figure out who some of these guys are. That's that's the long and short of it. For me, it was Johnny Saint was the one that jumped right off the page for me. That's the only one that I could, if someone asked me who are these guys, that's the first one that would come to mind for me. I do kind of remember some stuff about Adrian Street as John was talking about him. Like it kind of rang a bell. I did a little research also. I do kind of remember that, but I mean, we're talking about Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, Africa. I mean, these names. This is all we got. I don't. I that that's hard for me to come to grips with. That's a difficult decision there. Obviously, Saint was the one that got the nod, and we kind of all alluded to that being the consensus pick, but I just find it very difficult to believe that these are the few names out of all those countries that you could kind of come up with here, and how far back you have to go to get some of their backstories.
I agree with you guys on Johnny Saint. So I think that one is the only one that we've had that is unanimous across the board, if I'm not mistaken. So Will, what were your choices? Johnny Saint, and then
I'm gonna struggle to. I'll put Adrian Street on there just for a little bit of familiarity.
Exotic Adrian Street. Yes.
Yeah, and then I would struggle to have a third. I mean, I would probably go Danucci just for the reasons that John said. You know,
But
a
if you
little
don't
bit
want
of
to
my
put him in, if you're not familiar, then
yeah, for sure. No, I would have to be at those two. That would be it for me.
because I can't go three, to be honest with
Okay,
you,
fair enough.
and I am familiar with most of these guys. I do go Johnny Saint. I will give you that. I'll think that's unanimous among us. And then the only other one I would put in there is Otto Wanz, because yes, he did own his own promotion for a number of years, but he was dominating the Austrian German scene for a number of years across the 90s and early 2000s, and even further back into the 80s. So I'm going to say Johnny Saint and Otto Wanz. Now, mind you, he did own the promotion that he was the top star in, but he did bring in several stars over the course, whether they were going to or from Japan. They would always make a stop with Otto Wanz's CWA and be able to go ahead and have clashes. And he was, again, the star for quite a number of years in that area. So I will go with those guys right there. But that's who we have so far. Last but not least, for the categories are non-wrestlers. So here we go, guys. Dave Brown, Zane Bresloff, Bobby Bruns, Bob Caudle, Bobby Davis, Joe Higuchi, Jim Johnston, Larry Matasik, James Melby, Rossi Ogawa, Reggie Parks, Morris Siegel, Tony Schiavone, George Scott, Kevin Sullivan, Mike Tenay, Ted Turner, Roy Welch, Stanley Weston, Grand Wizard, and Koichi Yoshizawa. Will, I'll go with you first. This one is also a hard one because there's so many candidates of non-wrestlers. I'm curious as to why they put Kevin Sullivan as a non-wrestler. I'm assuming because of his booking, at various points of times with various promotions, but still, he had an outstanding wrestling career. It seems kind of unfair. Seems to tell me that, okay, we won't put him in as a wrestler, so let's put him in as a non-wrestler instead.
Yeah, this one was a little bit easier, I thought, because like you said, there were so many to choose from. The number one for me, and this is just based on kind of the Monday Night Wars and kind of my love of AEW or short-lived love of AEW, but Tony Schiavone jumps right off the page for me. I think he's one of the best voices to ever do it. I think Kevin Sullivan also for that significance that you mentioned with the booking, not necessarily. I'm not super familiar with his wrestling, but I know of him and some of the stories and stuff that he created and the behind the scenes stuff. So that's kind of my second nod there. And then my third nod is kind of off the page a little bit. But I go Ted Turner just with that significance for WCW and what they really did to make the Monday Night Wars a thing. I know he wasn't, super involved with the actual storyline stuff, but some of the billionaire Ted stuff that came out of that and then, making fun of him and stuff like that. But, really, really kind of put wrestling on the map for the Monday Night Wars. And that was a huge part of my upbringing. But I do want to say someone with it. You guys will probably provide a little bit more context, but someone with the name Grand Wizard kind of sticks out as being a little bit odd. But yeah, we'll leave that alone. But yeah, so those are my three picks there on that one.
All right, John, up to you, my friend. Are you going to call me Ted and say Ted Turner as well? How I got the recent documentary on Max on that. Yeah,
Gotcha. I'm going with Stanley Weston as my first pick because he's the guy that created the PWI and all those other magazines that was a staple of my childhood. So yes, while many people say, oh, it's Bill Apter, it's really not. It's Stanley Weston was behind him. So I'm picking him.
Yeah, but they were called the Apter mags for a reason.
Well, because I mean, I can't tell you what Stanley Weston looks like. I mean, the guy's an enigma. I mean,
True.
they needed somebody to be the face of the books, the magazines.
Good point.
I'm going to go Dave Brown out of Memphis. I think that he doesn't get enough credit. He and, of course, Lance Russell were the duo that called all that great Memphis action. But even when Lance disappeared and it was Corey Macklin and Dave Brown did a pretty darn good job because Corey Macklin was not a very good color commentator. So I'm picking him, and then sticking with commentators because we talked about him before, Mike Tenay. And I can't believe Mike Tenay is not in. Here's another one. I can't believe he's not in this Hall of Fame because you would have thought that for certain he would have been. So again, one of the better color commentators, play-by-play guys in the industry, Mike Tenay.
I'm going to start with Mike Tenay. I've met Mike Tenay, him and his wife, when they lived here in Vegas. But I don't know if he still lives here in Vegas, but when he lived here in Vegas, I met him in the 90s. Real classy individual. It was just before he got his gig with World Championship Wrestling. I'm happy that he got inducted into the TNA Hall of Fame. I think you have to start with this list with Mike Tenay, and I have no idea why he isn't. He's been a big proponent of the Wrestling Observer over the years, and so I don't know why I'm at a loss why he's not already been inducted. I remember seeing him. If you look at the old AWA, as far as the television in the 80s, you can actually see him sitting when they did the Showboat from Las Vegas. You actually see him sitting in the front row. He's the only one wearing a suit. It was so funny because, it's a true story that you could see him in there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. But I met him later on. Great guy. Met his wife. Absolutely fantastic people. But what he's done for the industry, what he did in the 90s, being able to educate listeners on the backgrounds and various moves of the wrestlers, nobody else was doing that. It was all like Tony Schiavone. Jim Ross did it to an extent, but he was more still, right into the storylines. When he went to the WWE, wasn't as much on the background, but he could give you knowledge on what was going on. But Mike Tenay really went into the background, really educated the viewers out there with his time at WCW. And then he became the guy behind the mic for over a decade in TNA and was the definitive voice there. So Mike Tenay for me is definitely a no-brainer on that choice. Second for me, Jim Johnston. And the reason why is all those iconic themes from the 80s going on for many, many, many years were created from him. And it's just a one-man band in many cases for some of the great tunes. So some of the most iconic theme songs for some of your favorite WWE superstars are courtesy of him. And last, but certainly not least, looking at it, I was thinking maybe Ted Turner, because like you said, Will, he's someone who took a chance on pro wrestling, not just once, but twice, when the industry needed, that type of change. Absolutely. Because he helped bring wrestling into the cable form. And then also as well, he said yes to Eric Bischoff and said, go to it and get something done. I'm close on him, but not this year. I would probably have to lean, if I was going to have to go ahead and say, just because he was so hands off after saying yes, I'd probably say Tony Schiavone. But again, for me, he's one of those, as far as Ted Turner, I'd probably go ahead and say, you know what, he'll be on it next year for me. That's for sure. I don't see anybody that's going to go ahead and beat him out next year, like Sid Vicious, like a couple others that are just no brainers for next year for me. But those are my picks as well. So, hey guys, any thoughts before we head on out on our picks? And I'll go ahead and I'll run them down before we leave.
I don't have anything other than say this was a fun challenge. I'll just say that.
Okay.
I just want to give John a little nugget of information here. The name Stanley Weston is also the inventor of G.I. Joe. Not the same man, but same name.
Okay, same name. Cool. Thank you.
I don't know. Just happened to be there.
All right. And with that, I will read from the bottom up in regards to our thoughts on the candidates for, we think, should be in the Pro Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame class of 2024. We picked 3 each in each category. Well, when we could, sometimes it was 2. We'll start off with non-wrestlers. I picked Mike Tenay, Jim Johnston, and Tony Schiavone. We have for John, Stan Weston, Dave Brown, and Mike Tenay. Will has Tony Schiavone, Kevin Sullivan, and Ted Turner. For the Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, and Africa, John has Dominic DeNucci, Johnny Saint, and Adrian Street. Will has Johnny Saint and Adrian Street. And I have Johnny Saint and Otto Vons. For Mexico, I have El Hijo del Santo and Octagon, La Parca, AAA, and Los Hermanos Dinamita. John has La Parca, AAA, El Dandy, El Hijo del Santo, and Octagon. And Will has La Parca. He was actually unanimous also as well. La Parca, AAA, Angel Blanco and Dr. Wagner, and Psycho Clown. All right. Japan candidates. John has Hayabusa, Manami Toyota, and Toshio Yamada, and Tiger Jeet Singh. Will has, because I had to go ahead and copy it twice, accidentally, Satoshi Kojima and Hiroyoshi Tenzan. Also, as well, Antonio Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi and Shingo Takagi. And I have Hayabusa, Meiko Sanomura, and Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada. Modern performers in the U.S. and Canada candidates. Say that 10 times fast. I think it was Will that has CM Punk, the Hardys, and Randy Orton. John has the Steiner brothers, Sid Vicious and Trish Stratus. And I have Asuka / Kana, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, and the Steiner brothers. It hurt me. Really, it hurt me to keep Sid Vicious off that list. I'm just going to say that. If he would come back from the dead to power bomb me, and you know what? I would be glad to take it. I'll just say that. Historical performers, last but not least, John said Sputnik Monroe, Rick Steamboat, and Jay Youngblood, Ole Anderson. Will said the Hart Foundation, Tully Blanchard, Arn Anderson, and the Iron Sheik. Ask him to say on Anaheim. It was always fun to watch his Anaheim promos. They're hilarious. Anaheim, pui. Gerald's has Hart Foundation, Blanchard and Anderson, and the Von Erichs. That is David, Kevin, and Carrie. If you have your thoughts, you leave it in the comments below or give us a heads up. popculturecosmos@yahoo.com. And on the next State of Pro Wrestling, John and I will read it for you on the show as well. Will, do you have anything you want to go ahead and plug or leave with us before we head on out? And you're always welcome to join one of our State of Pro Wrestlings whenever you get the opportunity to join us.
Okay, yeah, no, this was a pleasure, man, to be on with 2 absolute pros. I used to do stuff all the time, interviews and things of that nature. I'm kind of just career focused right now, so I haven't really been doing much of anything to plug lately. I have an independent wrestling show to ring announce tomorrow afternoon. It's my first one in a little while, so kind of excited to get back to that. But other than that, just head down right now and just kind of grinding through. But I greatly appreciate this opportunity for sure, man. You guys are 2 of the best.
Oh, we appreciate it. By any chance, though, when you see John live at an indie event, do you have this urge to sneak up behind and hit him with a chair?
Well, no, because like you pointed out with Mike Tenay, John's usually in a suit. And I usually try to not disrespect a man who's in a finely pressed suit.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. John, my tag team partner in crime on the show, what do you got to promote before we head on out?
Well, I would like to promote, of course, as you mentioned at the beginning of this episode, Matt Talk, which is the only Matlock-based podcast on the face of this planet. Myself and my partner, Jason, we review episodes from the classic Matlock TV series, and we do those the second and fourth Sundays of the month. Those we do live, and then, of course, the audio format's available later on. You can check us out on Facebook at Matt Talk Podcast, and then I have the PVD Cast, which is my own personal podcasting project. It's available wherever you find great podcasts. Also, you can find it over at pvdcast.com. I've got a great episode right now with an independent comic book creator by the name of Carl Lucas. It's a fun episode. He's got a big personality, so it runs off the rails a little bit, but it's great. And you can catch me, at PVD Cast on Threads, Instagram, and Facebook, and I'm even on Twitter at PVD MVP. And I'm still calling it Twitter, by the way. I don't care.
That's okay.
Someone made a snide comment a couple weeks ago, and I was like, nah, I don't care. It was Twitter when I was, when I first signed up, and if it hurts Elon's feelings, I'm sorry. Too bad.
Well, when you say X, I'm thinking something else. And when you're talking X, and
Yeah,
I'll just
that's
leave
true.
it at that. So
That's true.
yeah.
Anyways,
I say Twitter as well. The Twitter as well. Well, guys, it's been great sharing our thoughts on the Wrestling Observer's Hall of Fame, and to the candidates who did win, the people who did win, the wrestlers who did win, the inductees. Congratulations. And to each and every one of you who did win, and to their families if they have since passed. But to everyone out there, we want to hear your thoughts. Please let us know in the comments below, or popculturecosmos@yahoo.com. John and I will return, usually the last week of every month, talking the state of pro wrestling right here for the PVD Cast and also the Pop Culture Cosmos.